What really shapes a literary genius? Today, we're jumping into the first 20 years of Andrew Marvell's life, the foundational decades that built one of England's most brilliant metaphysical poets and, believe it or not, a pretty sharp politician too. So let's see how it all got started.
So it really makes you wonder, right? What forges the mind of a great poet? Is it a stable, scholarly upbringing? Or is it some sudden, unexpected twist of fate? For Andrew Marvell, the answer seems to be, well, both. Let's trace the events that shaped his entire world.
Marvell's story begins on a pretty traditional path. His early life was built on the solid, scholarly foundation, and you'd think he was on a straight path to a quiet life of learning and thinking.
Okay, so here's the roadmap. His journey kicks off in 1621. From there, his family moves, he gets into Cambridge as a total prodigy, and then bam, 1641. A single event happens that completely changes the entire trajectory of his life.
Marvell was born in 1621 in Yorkshire, and get this, his father, also named Andrew, was a clergyman in the Church of England. This means from day one, he was just immersed in this world of books, serious debate, and intellectual rigor. When he was just 3 years old, the family moved to Hull because his dad became the master of the local Charterhouse school. And this was a huge move. It put young Andrew right in the middle of an educational hub. He almost certainly ended up attending the grammar school that his own father ran.
And all that early learning, it paid off, big time. Which brings us to the next major phase of his life, his university education, which began at an age that is frankly just astonishing.
12. That's how old Andrew Marvell was when he got into Trinity College, Cambridge, back in 1633. Just let that sink in for a second. Starting university at an age when most of us are just figuring out middle school, it's a clear sign we're dealing with a truly prodigious mind here.
So what was he actually studying? Well, it was the heavy-duty stuff. His education at Cambridge was intense, steeped in the classical curriculum of the day. Latin, Greek, logic, rhetoric, philosophy. This wasn't just about memorizing facts. It was about building the framework for a razor-sharp analytical mind. And you know what? He crushed it, earning his Bachelor of Arts degree in 1639. Everything was pointing towards a very successful, if conventional, academic career. He even stayed on at Trinity, probably planning to get his master's. His path seemed completely laid out for him.
But it wasn't all just logic and philosophy. It's during these Cambridge years that we get the first real glimpse of his poetic talent, long before he wrote the famous stuff he's known for today.
At just 16 years old, Marvell did something pretty incredible for a student. He got 2 of his poems published. They appeared in a collection of verses by Cambridge poets, which, for a teenager, was a massive deal.
And check this out. This is what's really wild. He wasn't just writing poetry. He was doing it in classical languages. One poem was in Latin, the other in Greek. The Latin piece was this really sophisticated imitation of the poet Horace, showing an insane command of classical form for someone so young.
Now, these were pretty conventional student poems, celebrating a royal birth, but scholars all agree they show an incredible level of skill. They were solid proof of both his amazing training and his natural gift for poetry.
So you've got this picture, right? He's a published poet, a star scholar on a clear path to a comfortable academic life. But that whole carefully constructed world was about to be completely shattered.
A single, tragic event was about to divert the course of his future entirely and throw his perfectly planned life into chaos.
The year everything changes? 1641. The details are just tragic. In a terrible accident, his father, the Reverend Andrew Marvell, drowned in the Humber estuary near Hull. The intellectual and spiritual guide of his entire life was just suddenly gone.
And this wasn't just a personal tragedy. It had immediate, massive consequences for his future. It effectively slammed the door on one chapter of Marvell's life and forced a brand new one to begin.
The historical record here is crystal clear. Shortly after his father's death, Andrew Marvell left Cambridge. The academic career that seemed to be his destiny just came to a sudden, grinding halt. He would never finish that master's degree.
Now, we don't have a letter from him explaining exactly why he left, but the most likely reason comes down to money. With his father gone, the family's financial support for his education probably vanished. Marvell was forced to find a new way to make a living. So let's recap these first 20 years. What did he walk away with? A top-notch classical education, public proof that he had real poetic talent, and most importantly, a sudden, forceful push away from the quiet halls of academia and out into a completely unknown future.
And that leaves us with a really fascinating thought. What kind of poet would he have become? How might English literature and even politics be different if that tragic day in 1641 had never happened, and Andrew Marvell had simply stayed on to become a Cambridge professor?
Today, we're diving into one single, absolutely transformative decade in the life of the poet Andrew Marvell. We're talking about the period between 1641 and the mid-1650s, when a whole series of crises forged him from a brilliant student into this worldly, sophisticated poet-intellectual, really setting the stage for his entire political career.
It's that age-old question, right? We look at these incredible figures from history and wonder, what was it? Was it just raw talent? The perfect mentor? Or maybe just a lucky break? We're always searching for that one magic ingredient.
Well, for Andrew Marvell, the answer wasn't some quiet, orderly path. Nope. The crucial ingredient that really set his genius on fire was the complete and utter collapse of the world as he knew it. All right, so let's jump right back to where this all began, to the year that changed absolutely everything and sent him down a path no one could have predicted.
You have to understand, 1641 was just a brutal year for Marvell. First, this devastating personal tragedy. His father drowns. Then, right after, he leaves college without even finishing his master's degree. So his whole academic future? Poof, gone. And if that wasn't enough, the entire country starts to tear itself apart, sliding straight into civil war. His whole life was just completely turned upside down.
So, with every door in England seemingly slammed shut, what does Marvell do? He does something pretty remarkable. He doesn't just sit around and wait for the dust to settle. He heads out on a journey that would become the very foundation of his new identity. And that right there tells you everything you need to know about his mindset. Yeah, he was adrift, for sure, but he wasn't just floating along. He grabbed the reins of his own education, basically turning the entire continent of Europe into his own personal, living university.
And wow, what a classroom it was. We're talking years of travel through all the cultural and political hotspots of the 1640s. France, Holland, Spain, Italy, maybe even parts of Germany. He wasn't just a tourist taking in the sights, he was an observer, soaking up absolutely everything.
So what did he actually get out of all this travel? This is the really crucial part. First, he became a polyglot. He mastered French, Italian, Dutch, and Spanish, a skill that would later make him incredibly valuable. Second, he got direct political exposure. He was seeing with his own eyes how different states worked, the religious fights, the power struggles that were tearing Europe apart, just like they were back home. And finally, he just immersed himself in the incredible art and literature of the continent, which totally refined his own poetic style.
So when he finally sets foot back in England in the late 1640s, the Civil War is raging. The king has been defeated, Parliament's in charge, and the whole nation is just deeply, fundamentally divided. And if you were a thinking person back then, you were expected to pick a side.
And this is where things get really interesting, because you can see just how different Marvell was. You had the hardcore partisans like John Milton, who was all in for Parliament. You had the devoted royalists like Abraham Cowley. And then there was Marvell. He was the observer. His stance was ambiguous, hard to pin down, and that cautious, nuanced perspective, that was a direct result of his years abroad, of seeing that the world was a lot more complex than just simple black and white loyalties.
So, after absorbing all the chaos of Europe and coming home to a broken England, Marvell's genius finally found its voice, but not in the heat of a political debate, but in a place of total peace and quiet contemplation.
It's this incredible irony, isn't it? After years spent in the bustling, conflicted cities of Europe, his greatest, most enduring creative work would literally blossom in the tranquility of the English countryside. That special place was called Nunn Appleton House. Between 1650 and 52, he's working there as a tutor for the daughter of Lord Fairfax, who was a retired parliamentarian general. Now, this job gave him two absolutely critical things: a safe haven from all the political madness and access to a massive library. It was the perfect incubator for his talent. And wow, the results? They were absolutely staggering. This very short period produced some of the greatest poems in the entire English language. Classics like The Garden, the Mower poems, and that complex political masterpiece in Horatian Ode, they all came out of his time here. This was his creative explosion.
But this quiet retreat wasn't going to be the end of his story, not by a long shot. In fact, it was just the launchpad. After honing his poetic voice, Marvell started to edge his way back towards the center of public life.
His next move was huge. It took him from the quiet solitude of a country estate and put him right into the orbit of the most powerful man in all of England.
And you can see that climb, that upward trajectory so clearly here. He goes from tutoring the daughter of a respected but retired General Fairfax to tutoring a young man named William Dutton, who just so happened to be the ward of Oliver Cromwell himself. This wasn't just another tutoring gig, this was his ticket into the inner circle of the new government.
So here we are, by the mid-1650s, and that transformation that kicked off in all that chaos of 1641 is basically complete. A totally new kind of public figure had been forged in the fire.
The key takeaway is who he'd become. Think about it. He was no longer just a student from Cambridge. He was a polyglot world traveler, a poet of incredible refinement. He was politically sharp, with connections right to the very top. He had this unique blend of classic English wit and a sophisticated European elegance he'd picked up on his travels.
And this is really the core idea of this whole explainer, isn't it? The chaos, the personal loss, the forced journey abroad, all of it came together to create this complex, mature, and worldly figure who is now ready for a major life in public service.
Which kind of leaves us with one big question, right? Was this incredible transformation just an accident of history? A reaction to the crazy times he lived in? Or was it a deliberate act of self-creation? A conscious choice to turn all that disruption into a new kind of education? Maybe the real genius lies in the ability to do both.
All right, let's dive into the final and honestly the most dramatic chapter of Andrew Marvell's life. We think we know him, right? The poet of quiet, thoughtful verse. But for the last 20 years of his life, he was living a kind of secret double life, as a politician, a diplomat, and a totally fearless satirist. So let's get into how the man of quiet gardens became a warrior in the political arena.
This really is the central puzzle of Marvell's career, isn't it? It's a journey from this very private world of contemplation to the very public and, let me tell you, very dangerous world of 17th century English politics. How on earth did one man manage to be both of these things so completely?
So on one side, you've got the poet, the guy who wrote The Garden, just a masterpiece of quiet reflection. And on the other, the politician, a public servant who used his pen not for beauty, but as a weapon. For pretty much his entire life, the world only knew one of these men, and it's probably not the one you're thinking of.
So, how does a shift like this even begin? Well, it doesn't start with some grand gesture. It starts with a job offer from one of the most towering literary figures in all of history.
And look, this wasn't just any old government job. In 1657, Marvell stepped right into the heart of Cromwell's government. I mean, we're talking about the engine room of England's foreign policy. This was a move that would set him on a completely new path and really change the entire course of his life forever.
The key detail here, the name you need to remember, is John Milton. Yeah, that John Milton, the author of Paradise Lost. Milton himself recommended Marvell to be his assistant, and together they handled all of England's foreign correspondence. This job gave Marvell some serious political experience, and just 2 years later, he was elected Member of Parliament for his hometown of Hull, a role he'd hold for the rest of his life.
Now, being a member of Parliament came with enormous risks, and Marvell was about to face the single most defining test of his political career, a moment that required just incredible bravery. I want you to just imagine the scene. It's 1660. After years of civil war and Republican rule, King Charles II returns to the throne. The entire political landscape is just turned upside down overnight. Loyalty is suddenly everything, and a lot of old scores are about to be settled.
For anyone who had supported the previous government, this was a terrifying time. The new regime was on the hunt for scapegoats, and the punishment for treason was brutal and very, very public.
And who was at the very top of that hit list? Marvell's old boss, John Milton. He had been the intellectual voice of Cromwell's government. His writings had directly challenged the divine right of kings.
In the eyes of the new monarchy, he was a traitor, plain and simple.
The stakes could not have been higher. The punishment was execution. Defending a guy like Milton, that was career suicide, at best. At worst, it could get you killed. So who would possibly step up and risk it all?
Andrew Marvell, that's who. Quietly, skillfully, he used his new influence in Parliament to go to bat for his old mentor. It was a masterclass in political maneuvering. And just think about what was at stake here. Without Marvell's incredible courage, the world might never have gotten Paradise Lost. This single act of loyalty just shows you the incredible depth of his character.
But, just defending his friends wasn't enough. Marvell looked around and saw a government sinking into corruption and hypocrisy, and he decided to fight back with his sharpest tool, his wit.
You have to understand, back in the 17th century, you couldn't just write an op-ed criticizing the government. That would get you thrown in the Tower of London, no questions asked. Satire, that was the loophole. It used humor, irony, and wit to attack powerful people indirectly. But it was still an incredibly dangerous game to play. And Marvell had plenty of targets. He was absolutely disgusted by the greed and the moral decay he saw in the court of Charles II. He saw the principles of the English Commonwealth just being traded away for power and money, and he was not going to stand for it.
And his method was just devastatingly effective. In works like The Rehearsal Transposed, he used this sharp humor to argue for religious tolerance. But his most explosive piece, An Account of the Growth of Popery, was a direct assault on government corruption. So dangerous, he had to publish it anonymously. His wit had truly become a political weapon.
Now, throughout this whole dangerous career, Marvell maintained a very specific public image. But the biggest secret of his life? That would only come out after he was gone. In an age of just rampant bribery and excess, Marvell was known as the incorruptible MP. He lived a simple, modest life. He was respected for his intelligence and his integrity, even by his political opponents. To the whole world, he was a dedicated and serious public servant. That was it.
So you look at this timeline of his last decade, and it's just a whirlwind of activity. Diplomatic missions across Europe, publishing his fiercest satires, all while serving in Parliament. Then, in 1678, he dies suddenly. And it's right here that the story takes its most unbelievable turn.
So, after he died, his housekeeper found this chest full of his private papers, and inside was a collection of poems. Believing they were worth sharing with the world, she had them published. And suddenly, masterpieces like To His Coy Mistress, poems no one had ever even seen before, were out in the world.
The impact was just staggering. The incorruptible politician, the biting satirist, was suddenly revealed to be one of the most brilliant poets of his entire generation. The irony is just immense. The literary fame that we remember him for today was completely posthumous. He never even knew it.
So when we look at his complete legacy, what do we actually see? We see this incredibly complex figure. The politician, the satirist, the defender of liberty. These were the roles he played out in public. But simmering right underneath all of it was the private genius, the poet, whose work would outlive every single one of his political battles.
Which leaves us with this fascinating question. Marvell lived his life as a politician, risking everything in the public arena. But he's remembered today as a poet, for art he created in private. So which legacy do you think matters more? The public life he led, or the private art he left behind? Now that's a question worth pondering.